The bouquet of roses I'd ordered for our dining room table were still fresh, their crimson petals standing in stark contrast to the pristine white tablecloth I'd meticulously laid out. The anniversary card I'd written that morning sat unopened, beside the crystal wine glasses, the same ones we'd received as a wedding gift 5 years ago. I checked my phone again. 8:47 p.m. 3 hours and 17 minutes since I'd texted Marcus asking when he'd be home. No response. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I smoothed my navy blue dress, his favorite, and blew out the candles that had burned halfway down. The romantic dinner I'd prepared was now cold, congealing on the plates I'd set out with such care. I should have known better. The signs had been there for months. Late nights at the office, mysterious weekend conferences, the sudden password changes on his phone. But tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was our anniversary. My name is Vanessa Mitchell, and this is the story of how I discovered my husband was having an affair on our anniversary, the same day I received the call that would have changed his life forever. The front door finally clicked open at 11:23 p.m. I was curled up on the couch, still in my dress, pretending to read a book while scrolling through the photos Marcus's coworker Tara had posted on Instagram hours earlier. There he was, my husband, his arm casually draped around her waist at what was clearly not a client emergency meeting, but drinks at the Lakeview Hotel's rooftop bar. The timestamp, 7:15 p.m., precisely when we were supposed to be toasting to our 5 years of marriage. "Hey, you're still up," Marcus said, loosening his tie as he walked in. He smelled of expensive perfume, not mine, and whiskey. "Sorry about that. The Henderson account had a crisis. You wouldn't believe the night I've had." I set my phone down carefully, screen facing up, the incriminating photo still displayed. "I think I actually would believe it, Marcus." He didn't notice the photo immediately, too busy removing his jacket and checking his own phone. I tried to text, but you know how the reception is in the conference rooms. "The conference rooms at the Lakeview Hotel's rooftop bar?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. His head snapped up, eyes finally landing on my phone screen. The color drained from his face so quickly I might have been concerned if my heart wasn't already splintering into pieces. "Vanessa, I can explain..." "Explain what, exactly?" "How you forgot our anniversary to have drinks with your mistress, or how you've been lying to me for months. Which part needs clarification, Marcus?" He sank into the armchair across from me, running his hands through his perfectly styled dark hair. "It's not what it looks like." "It never is," I replied, standing up. "The dinner I made is in the kitchen. It's cold now, just like everything else between us." I walked past him toward our bedroom, but paused at the hallway. "By the way, David, Franklin called from corporate today. He needed to speak with you urgently about your position. Apparently, there's been a restructuring." Marcus's eyes widened. "David called here? What did he say exactly?" I shrugged, the weight of the information I was withholding sitting heavily on my shoulders. "Something about your department being eliminated. He asked that you call him back immediately." I checked my watch deliberately. "That was about 12 hours ago. I forgot to tell you. I guess we both forgot important things today." The look of panic that crossed his face almost made me feel guilty. Almost. "Vanessa, wait." But I was already closing the bedroom door. Behind me, sliding the lock into place. Through the door, I heard him frantically dialing, then his panicked voice. "David, it's Marcus Mitchell returning your call from earlier." I slid down against the door, finally allowing the tears I'd been holding back to fall freely. In the span of one day, I'd lost both my marriage and my faith in the man I thought would love me forever. What I didn't know then was that this ending was actually the beginning of discovering my own strength, and a new life I couldn't yet imagine. Rachel, my best friend since college, arrived at my door the next morning with coffee and determination in equal measure. I'd texted her at 3 a.m. after Marcus had spent hours alternating between pleading with me through the bedroom door and making increasingly agitated phone calls. "He seriously forgot your anniversary to be with her?" Rachel asked, passing me a tea latte as we sat at my kitchen counter. The remains of my ruined anniversary dinner had been cleared away, by Marcus, I presumed, in a rare show of consideration. 5 years of marriage, and he couldn't even be bothered to remember, I said, running my finger around the rim of my mug. But that's not even the worst part. He looked me in the eye and lied about it. Again. Rachel pulled her copper hair into a messy bun, her trademark move when strategizing. "And this Tara person? She's from his office?" "His assistant, 28, recently divorced. Started working for him about 8 months ago." I laughed bitterly. So cliché it hurts. "And the layoff? Is he actually losing his job?" Rachel asked, lowering her voice though we were alone in the house. Marcus had finally left early that morning after I'd refused to open the bedroom door. I nodded. David confirmed it when he called back this morning. The entire executive team is being restructured. Marcus has 6 weeks, and then he's out. Apparently, they've been planning this for months. I took a sip of my coffee. David was calling to give him a heads up before the official announcement today. He seemed surprised Marcus wasn't prepared, because his loyal wife didn't pass along the message, Rachel said with a hint of admiration in her voice. "I'd planned to tell him during our anniversary dinner," I admitted. "Then I saw those photos, and something just snapped." A notification pinged on my phone, another text from Marcus. "We need to talk. Please. Everything is falling apart." Rachel glanced at my screen. "What are you going to do?" I set my phone face down on the counter. "I don't know. Part of me wants to pack my bags and disappear. Another part wants to make him feel the pain I'm feeling." I paused, suddenly overwhelmed. I built my entire life around him, Rachel. I gave up my career to move for his promotion. I spent 5 years being the perfect corporate wife while he was building a life with someone else. Rachel reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. "Then maybe it's time to start building a life for yourself." The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. I wiped my eyes quickly and went to answer it, expecting to see Marcus, perhaps with flowers and apologies. Instead, I found Nathan Cooper, Marcus's best friend and colleague, looking uncomfortable on my doorstep. "Nathan? What are you doing? Here?" I asked, suddenly aware of my rumpled appearance and tear-stained face. "Hey, Vanessa," he said, shifting awkwardly. "Is Marcus here? He's not answering his phone, and he missed the emergency company meeting this morning." "The restructuring announcement," I said flatly. Nathan's eyebrows shot up. "You know about that? David Franklin called yesterday. I was supposed to give Marcus the message." I stepped back, gesturing for Nathan to come inside. He hesitated before entering. "Supposed to?" "I forgot," I said simply, leading him to the kitchen where Rachel was still sitting. Nathan nodded at Rachel before turning back to me. "Vanessa, what's going on? Marcus hasn't been himself lately, and now he's missing important meetings." I leaned against the counter, suddenly tired. "Why don't you ask Tara where he is? They seemed quite cozy at the Lakeview last night, during our anniversary dinner." Nathan's face fell. "Oh, Vanessa, I'm so sorry." "You knew," I said, not a question, but a statement. He had the decency to look ashamed. "I suspected. I tried to talk to him about it, but..." He trailed off, running a hand through his short blonde hair. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out, about any of it." "Well, life is full of disappointments," I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "Like discovering your husband is cheating on you and losing his job in the same day." Nathan winced. "For what it's worth, the company is offering decent severance packages. 6-month salary, extended health benefits. It's not ideal, but it's something. I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. Something? Nathan, Marcus has been the primary breadwinner since we moved. Here, we have a mortgage that's based on his salary. We have... I stopped, a new realization dawning. We have a life built on his income and his lies. Rachel stood up, putting her arm around my shoulders. And now you get to decide what comes next. Nathan looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. I should go find Marcus, if he contacts you. I'll let him know his world is collapsing. I finished for him, just like mine did yesterday. After Nathan left, Rachel helped me make a list of next steps. First, I called my old boss, Marina, who had been trying to recruit me back to the architectural firm for years. Then, I contacted a lawyer friend for preliminary advice. By evening, I had the beginnings of a plan and a job interview scheduled for the following week. I was reviewing my updated resume when the front door opened. Marcus walked in, looking like he'd aged years in a single day. His normally immaculate suit was wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Where have you been?" I asked, closing my laptop. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Driving. Thinking. He slumped onto the couch across from me. "I lost my job today." I nodded. "I know. You knew." His voice hardened slightly. "You knew yesterday and you didn't tell me." "Yes," I admitted. "Just like you knew it was our anniversary and chose to spend it with Tara instead." He flinched at her name. "That's not the same thing, Vanessa. This is my career we're talking about. 5 years of work, gone." "And this is our marriage we're talking about," I countered. 5 years of commitment, broken. Marcus leaned forward, his expression pleading. "I made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. But I love you, Vanessa. We can fix this." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. The man I'd fallen in love with, the man I'd supported through late nights and career changes, the man who had held my hand through my father's funeral and promised to never leave me alone. Now a stranger sitting in our living room, begging for forgiveness with the same lips that had kissed another woman on our anniversary. "Can we? Can we really fix this, Marcus?" I asked softly. He nodded eagerly. "Yes, I'll end things with Tara. I'll find another job. I'll do whatever it takes." "And what about the trust? Can you fix that too?" His silence was answer enough. I stood up, gathering my laptop and the notes Rachel and I had made earlier. "I have a job interview next week, with Marina at Preston. Architects." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "In Chicago?" "Yes, in Chicago, where my career was headed before I moved here for yours." "Vanessa, we can't just..." "No, Marcus. You can't just..." "I can. I am." I headed toward the stairs. "I'll be staying in the guest room tonight. I think we both need space to figure out what comes next." As I climbed the stairs, I heard him call after me, "I really do love you, Vanessa." I paused, not turning around. I know. That's what makes this so sad. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of awkward silences and separate lives under one roof. Marcus found temporary work consulting while applying for new executive positions. I threw myself into preparing for my interview with Marina, trying to reignite the passion for architectural design that I'd set aside for Marcus's career. The night before my interview, I was working late at the dining room table, the same one where my anniversary dinner had gone cold, when Marcus came in and set a cup of tea beside me. "You always liked chamomile before big meetings," he said, quietly, hovering nearby as if unsure whether to sit down. I looked up from my portfolio, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you." He lingered, hands in his pockets. Do you remember our first apartment? That tiny place with the leaking ceiling and the view of the brick wall? Despite everything, I smiled, and the radiator that sounded like it was possessed. You used to sketch redesigns of it on napkins, he continued, finally sitting down, across from me. You'd say, "One day I'm going to build spaces that make people feel at home." I closed my portfolio slowly. I remember. You were brilliant, Vanessa. Are brilliant. He reached across the table as if to take my hand, then thought better of it. I'm sorry I took that away from you. You didn't take it, I corrected him gently. I gave it. There's a difference. He nodded, his eyes sad. And now? Now I'm taking it back, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. Along with everything else. Marcus swallowed hard. I ended things with Tara. Completely. For good. I'm glad. Not because I thought it would fix us, he clarified quickly, but because it was the right thing to do. It never should have happened in the first place. I took a sip of the tea he'd made, letting the warmth spread through me. Why? Did it, Marcus? Why her? Why then? He looked down at his hands, the gold wedding band still on his finger glinting in the dining room light. I was failing at work. The company was struggling, and I knew the layoffs were coming. I couldn't tell you, couldn't admit that I wasn't the successful provider I'd promised to be. His voice cracked slightly. Tara made me feel competent when everything else was falling apart. So you replaced one failure with another, I observed, not unkindly. He nodded, miserable, and lost everything that actually mattered in the process. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 5 years of marriage, both the love and the betrayal, hanging between us. Finally, I spoke. I have to be up early tomorrow for my flight to Chicago. Marcus stood, understanding the dismissal. You're going to be amazing, Vanessa. You always were. As he turned to leave, I found myself asking, do you remember what you said to me on our first date when I told you about my dream of designing sustainable housing? He paused, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. Dream bigger, Vanessa. The world needs your vision, I finished, quoting his words back to him. For a moment, we were just Marcus and Vanessa again, before the promotion, before the move, before the betrayal. Then the moment passed, and he was walking away, leaving me alone with my portfolio and my tea, and the future I was finally reclaiming. The Chicago skyline welcomed me like an old friend as my plane descended the next morning. Marina met me at the airport, her familiar embrace and no-nonsense attitude instantly grounding me. You look good, Mitchell, she said, appraising me as we walked to her car. Tired, but good. It's been an eventful few weeks, I replied, sliding into the passenger seat. So I gathered from your cryptic texts. Marina navigated through the morning traffic with practiced ease. Want to talk about it, or shall we focus on how you're going to dazzle the partners this afternoon? I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Can we do both? By the time we reached the Preston Architects building, a stunning glass and steel structure I'd always admired, Marina knew the entire story. She whistled low as she parked. So your husband cheats on your anniversary and you forget to tell him he's being laid off? That's either the pettiest or most brilliant revenge I've ever heard. I winced. It wasn't my finest moment. Debatable, Marina replied, grabbing her bag. But what matters now is what's next for Vanessa Mitchell, not what Marcus Mitchell did or didn't do. As we rode the elevator to the firm's offices, I took a deep breath, straightening my shoulders. You're right. This is about my future now. Marina squeezed my arm reassuringly. And from where I'm standing, it looks pretty bright. I'd forgotten how much I loved being in a design studio. The energy, the creativity, the sense of building something meaningful. The interview with the partners went better than I could have hoped, my portfolio speaking to skills that had lain dormant but never disappeared. By the end of the day, I had a job offer and a promise of help finding an apartment in the city. "Celebration dinner?" Marina suggested as we left the building. "The team wants to take you out, welcome you properly." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "How did it go?" I hesitated, then typed, "They offered me the job, starting in 3 weeks." His reply came quickly. "I never doubted you. Congratulations, Vanessa. You deserve this." I stared at the message, emotion welling up unexpectedly. Despite everything, a part of me wished he could share this moment, the man he had been, not the one he became. "Everything okay?" Marina asked, watching my face. I put my phone away, turning to her, with a genuine smile. "Yes, I think it finally is. And dinner sounds perfect." That night, in my hotel room overlooking the city I'd once called home, I wrote 2 emails. The first was to Rachel, sharing my news and asking if she'd help me pack up my life in the coming weeks. The second was harder to write, my fingers hovering over the keyboard for long minutes before I began typing. "Dear Marcus, by the time you read this, I'll be on my way back to pack my things. I've accepted the position at Preston. They're offering me the chance to lead their new sustainable housing division, the dream I once told you about on our first date. I don't know what the future holds for us. The pain of your betrayal is still too fresh, the trust too broken for me to see clearly. What I do know is that I need to rediscover who I am without you, the woman I was before I made your dreams more important than my own. You asked me once to dream bigger. Now I finally am. Vanessa." I hit send, then walked to the window, looking out at the twinkling lights of Chicago. Somewhere in this vast city was a new life waiting for me. One built on my own talents, my own choices, my own strength. For the first time in years, I felt truly, completely awake. The woman who had stood in her dining room just 2 weeks ago, staring at cold food and unanswered texts, seemed like a stranger now. In her place was someone new, or perhaps someone who had been there all along, just waiting for the chance to emerge. My husband forgot our anniversary to be with his mistress. I forgot to tell him about his layoff. Those twin betrayals could have been the end of our story. Instead, they became the beginning of mine. Rachel, my best friend since college, arrived at my door the next morning with coffee and determination in equal measure. I'd texted her at 3 a.m. after Marcus had spent hours alternating between pleading with me through the bedroom door and making increasingly agitated phone calls. "He seriously forgot your anniversary to be with her?" Rachel asked, passing me a latte as we sat at my kitchen counter. The remains of my ruined anniversary dinner had been cleared away, by Marcus, I presumed, in a rare show of consideration. 5 years of marriage, and he couldn't even be bothered to remember, I said, running my finger around the rim of my mug. But that's not even the worst part. He looked me in the eye and lied about it. Again. Rachel pulled her copper hair into a messy bun, her trademark move when strategizing. "And this Tara person, she's from his office?" "His assistant, 28, recently divorced. Started working for him about 8 months ago." I laughed bitterly. So cliché it hurts. "And the layoff? Is he actually losing his job?" Rachel asked, lowering her voice, though we were alone in the house. Marcus had finally left early, that morning after I'd refused to open the bedroom door. I nodded. David confirmed it when he called back this morning. The entire executive team is being restructured. Marcus has 6 weeks, and then he's out. Apparently, they've been planning this for months. I took a sip of my coffee. David was calling to give him a heads up before the official announcement today. He seemed surprised Marcus wasn't prepared. "Because his loyal wife didn't pass along the message," Rachel said with a hint of admiration in her voice. "I'd planned to tell him during our anniversary dinner," I admitted. Then I saw those photos and something just snapped. A notification pinged on my phone. Another text from Marcus. "We need to talk, please. Everything is falling apart." Rachel glanced at my screen. "What are you going to do?" I set my phone face down on the counter. "I don't know. Part of me wants to pack my bags and disappear. Another part wants to make him feel the pain I'm feeling." I paused, suddenly overwhelmed. I built my entire life around him, Rachel. I gave up my career to move for his promotion. I spent 5 years being the perfect corporate wife while he was building a life with someone else. Rachel reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. "Then maybe it's time to start building a life for yourself." The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. I wiped my eyes quickly and went to answer it, expecting to see Marcus, perhaps with flowers and apologies. Instead, I found Nathan Cooper, Marcus's best friend and colleague, looking uncomfortable on my doorstep. "Nathan, what are you doing? Here?" I asked, suddenly aware of my rumpled appearance and tear-stained face. "Hey, Vanessa," he said, shifting awkwardly. "Is Marcus here?" He's not answering his phone, and he missed the emergency company meeting this morning. "The restructuring announcement," I said flatly. Nathan's eyebrows shot up. "You know about that? David Franklin called yesterday. I was supposed to give Marcus the message." I stepped back, gesturing for Nathan to come inside. He hesitated before entering. "Supposed to?" "I forgot," I said simply, leading him to the kitchen where Rachel was still sitting. Nathan nodded at Rachel before turning back to me. "Vanessa, what's going on? Marcus hasn't been himself lately, and now he's missing important meetings." I leaned against the counter, suddenly tired. "Why don't you ask Tara where he is? They seemed quite cozy at the Lakeview last night, during our anniversary dinner." Nathan's face fell. "Oh, Vanessa, I'm so sorry." "You knew," I said, not a question but a statement. He had the decency to look ashamed. "I suspected. I tried to talk to him about it, but..." He trailed off, running a hand through his short blonde hair. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out about any of it." "Well, life is full of disappointments," I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "Like discovering your husband is cheating on you and losing his job in the same day." Nathan winced. "For what it's worth, the company is offering decent severance packages, 6 months' salary, extended health benefits. It's not ideal, but it's something." I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. "Something?" "Nathan, Marcus has been the primary breadwinner since we moved. Here, we have a mortgage that's based on his salary. We have..." I stopped, a new realization dawning. "We have a life built on his income and his lies." Rachel stood up, putting her arm around my shoulders. "And now you get to decide what comes next." Nathan looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "I should go find Marcus. If he contacts you, I'll let him know his world is collapsing," I finished for him. "Just like mine did yesterday." After Nathan left, Rachel helped me make a list of next steps. First, I called my old boss, Marina, who had been trying to recruit me back to the architectural firm for years. Then, I contacted a lawyer friend for preliminary advice. By evening, I had the beginnings of a plan and a job interview scheduled for the following week. I was reviewing my updated resume when the front door opened. Marcus walked in, looking like he'd aged years in a single day. His normally immaculate suit was wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Where have you been?" I asked, closing my laptop. "Driving. Thinking." He slumped onto the couch across from me. "I lost my job today." I nodded. "I know. You knew." His voice hardened slightly. "You knew yesterday and you didn't tell me." "Yes," I admitted. "Just like you knew it was our anniversary and chose to spend it with Tara instead." He flinched at her name. That's not the same thing, Vanessa. This is my career we're talking about. 5 years of work, gone. And this is our marriage we're talking about, I countered. 5 years of commitment, broken. Marcus leaned forward, his expression pleading. I made a mistake, a terrible, unforgivable mistake. But I love you, Vanessa. We can fix this. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. The man I'd fallen in love with, the man I'd supported through late nights and career changes, the man who had held my hand through my father's funeral and promised to never leave me alone. Now a stranger sitting in our living room, begging for forgiveness with the same lips that had kissed another woman on our anniversary. Can we? Can we really fix this, Marcus? I asked softly. He nodded eagerly. Yes, I'll end things with Tara. I'll find another job. I'll do whatever it takes. And what about the trust? Can you fix that too? His silence was answer enough. I stood up, gathering my laptop and the notes Rachel and I had made earlier. I have a job interview next week with Marina at Preston. Architects. His eyebrows rose in surprise. In Chicago? Yes, in Chicago, where my career was headed before I moved here for yours. Vanessa, we can't just... No, Marcus. You can't just... I can. I am. I headed toward the stairs. I'll be staying in the guest room tonight. I think we both need space to figure out what comes next. As I climbed the stairs, I heard him call after me. I really do love you, Vanessa. I paused, not turning around. I know. That's what makes this so sad. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, my body rigid with tension despite the plush comfort of the guest room bed. The house was quiet, too quiet, making me wonder if Marcus had even come home last night after storming out following our confrontation. I slipped on my robe and padded downstairs, half expecting to find evidence of his continued absence, perhaps even a note explaining he'd gone to stay with her. Instead, I found him asleep on the living room couch, his tall frame awkwardly contorted to fit the space, his suit jacket draped over him like a makeshift blanket. An empty whiskey glass sat on the coffee table beside his phone, which was lighting up with notifications. Probably work emails about the restructuring, I thought with a twinge of something that wasn't quite guilt. Not quite. I stood watching him for a moment. This man who had been the center of my universe for half a decade. In sleep, his face looked younger, more vulnerable. The hard lines of stress and deception temporarily smoothed away. For a fleeting second, I allowed myself to remember the Marcus I'd fallen in love with. Passionate, driven, kind. The Marcus who'd stayed up all night to help me finish a portfolio presentation when we were still dating. The Marcus who'd held me for hours after my father's funeral, not saying a word, just being there. Where had that man gone? Had he ever really existed? Or had I just seen what I wanted to see? His phone buzzed again, the screen illuminating with a text notification. I couldn't help but glance down. Tara. Meeting in 20? Need to talk about. What happened? The tender nostalgia that had momentarily softened my heart hardened instantly. Even now, even after everything had imploded, she was still reaching out. Still part of his life. I stepped back, accidentally knocking against the bookshelf. A framed photo of us on our honeymoon, laughing on a beach in Bali, sunburned and deliriously happy, tilted and fell with a crash. Instead, I found him asleep. On the living room couch, his tall frame awkwardly contorted to fit the space. His suit jacket draped over him like a makeshift blanket. An empty whiskey glass sat on the coffee table beside his phone, which was lighting up with notifications. Probably work emails about the restructuring, I thought with a twinge of something that wasn't quite guilt. Not quite. I stood watching him for a moment. This man who had been the center of my universe for half a decade. In sleep, his face looked younger, more vulnerable. The hard lines of stress and deception temporarily smoothed away. For a fleeting second, I allowed myself to remember the Marcus I'd fallen in love with. Passionate, driven, kind. The Marcus who'd stayed up all night to help me finish a portfolio presentation when we were still dating. The Marcus who'd held me for hours after my father's funeral, not saying a word, just being there. Where had that man gone? Had he ever really existed? Or had I just seen what I wanted to see? His phone buzzed again, the screen illuminating with a text notification. I couldn't help but glance down. Tara. Meeting in 20? Need to talk about what happened. The tender nostalgia that had momentarily softened my heart hardened instantly. Even now, even after everything had imploded, she was still reaching out. Still part of his life. I stepped back, accidentally knocking against the bookshelf. A framed photo of us on our honeymoon, laughing on a beach in Bali, sunburned and deliriously happy, tilted and fell with a crash. Marcus jolted awake, disoriented. Vanessa? His voice was rough with sleep, and I suspected the aftermath of too much whiskey. Your girlfriend texted, I said coldly, turning toward the kitchen. She wants to meet. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his phone and scanning the message. It's not, she's just, we work together, Vanessa. Not anymore, you don't. I filled the kettle, focusing on the simple task rather than the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Or did you forget that part too? He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, wincing slightly as if the movement caused him pain. Look, I need to sort things out at work. The restructuring, the handover. I can't just disappear. Of course not, I agreed, my tone deliberately neutral as I reached for a mug. You have responsibilities, unlike our marriage, which was apparently optional. That's not fair, he protested weakly. I slammed the mug down harder than intended, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. Fair? You want to talk about fair, Marcus? Was it fair when you told me to give up my career at Preston because we needed to prioritize your promotion? Was it fair when you promised it would be temporary, just until you were established? Was it fair when 1 year turned into 5, and suddenly I'm playing hostess at corporate dinners instead of designing buildings? My voice rose with each question, years of suppressed resentment bubbling to the surface. Marcus stared at me, clearly taken aback by my outburst. I never knew you felt that way. Because you never asked, I said simply, the fight draining out of me as quickly as it had erupted. You never asked, and I never told you because I was trying to be the supportive wife you needed, the perfect corporate partner. I let out a bitter laugh. Meanwhile, you were finding support elsewhere. He took a step toward me, then seemed to think better of it. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Vanessa. The thing with Tara, I was feeling like a failure at work. The company was struggling, layoffs were coming, and I couldn't admit that to you. So, you sought comfort in the arms of your 28-year-old assistant? I raised an eyebrow. How original. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. I know how it sounds. I know how it looks. But it wasn't just physical. Stop. I held up a hand. That doesn't make it better, Marcus. That makes it worse. The kettle whistled, a shrill interruption that made us both jump. I turned to switch it off, grateful for the momentary distraction. What do you want me to do, Vanessa? Marcus asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the fading whistle. I poured hot water over a tea bag, watching the color seep into the clear liquid. I want you to go to your meeting with Tara. I want you to handle your job transition. I want you to give me space to think about what I want, what I really want, without you hovering and pleading and making promises you probably can't keep. He nodded slowly, the resignation in his eyes telling me he'd expected this response. And us? Is there still an us to salvage? I stirred my tea, buying time before answering. The truth was, I didn't know. Part of me wanted to throw 5 years of marriage away as casually as he had tossed aside our anniversary. Another part remembered the good times, the foundation we'd built, the life we'd planned together. I don't know, I said honestly. Right now, I need to focus on me for a change. Starting with this interview at Preston. Marcus reached for his jacket, straightening his rumpled shirt as best he could. When is it? Next week, Marina fast-tracked it. Marina, he repeated, recognition crossing his face. Your old boss. The one who keeps trying to hire you back. I nodded. She never gave up on me, even when I gave up on myself. A look of genuine contrition crossed his face. I'm sorry, Vanessa, for all of it. He hesitated, then added, if you need anything for the interview, prep, paperwork from our move, anything, just ask. It was a small olive branch, but I accepted it with a nod. Thank you. He gathered his things and headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. Will you be here when I get back? Yes, I said after a moment. But Marcus? He turned back to me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Don't come home smelling like her perfume again. The hope dimmed, replaced by shame. He nodded once, then left, the door closing quietly behind him. I sank onto a kitchen stool, cradling my tea, suddenly exhausted though the day had barely begun. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. You okay? Need me to come over? I typed back, I'm okay, sorting things out. Call you later. Setting my phone aside, I pulled my laptop toward me and opened the email from Marina with the interview details. The position was even better than I'd initially thought. Senior Project Architect for Sustainable Urban Development, with a focus on affordable housing. Exactly the kind of meaningful work I'd dreamed of doing before life took a detour. As I scrolled through the project briefs Marina had attached, I felt a spark of excitement ignite within me, a feeling so foreign that it took me a moment to recognize it. Passion, purpose, the sense that I could create something that mattered. When had I last felt that way? When had I stopped being the ambitious, creative woman Marcus had fallen in love with? Had he sought out Tara because she reminded him of who I used to be? Energetic, dedicated, present? No. I shut down that line of thinking immediately. His choices were his own. His betrayal was not my failure. I spent the morning immersed in research, refreshing my knowledge of current architectural trends and sustainable building practices. By noon, I'd outlined a portfolio presentation that highlighted my past achievements while acknowledging the gap in my professional experience. I was so absorbed that I barely registered the sound of the front door opening until a throat cleared behind me. I turned to find Marcus standing there, looking marginally more put together than when he'd left, but with a weariness in his eyes that spoke volumes. That was quick, I commented, glancing at the clock. It was just past noon. I didn't meet her, he said simply. I texted to say I couldn't make it. I raised an eyebrow, surprised. The great Marcus Mitchell turning down a meeting? I thought that was against your religion. He didn't rise to the bait, instead placing a paper bag on the counter. I brought lunch, if you're hungry. The gesture was so unexpected that I didn't immediately respond. It had been months since we'd shared a meal that wasn't a formal dinner party or a rushed breakfast. I went to that Vietnamese place you like, he added when I remained silent. The one with the PHO that you said could cure anything. Even betrayal? I asked, but there was less bite in my tone than before. He winced. I deserve that. And no, probably not. But I thought maybe we could talk, really talk. No excuses, no deflection. I considered turning him down, telling him I was too busy preparing for my interview, too angry for conversation. But something in his demeanor, a humility I wasn't accustomed to seeing, made me hesitate. All right, I said finally, closing my laptop. We can talk. He unpacked the food, the familiar aroma of star anise and cinnamon filling the kitchen. We ate in silence at first, the tension between us almost a physical presence. Finally, Marcus set down his spoon and looked at me directly. "I've been a terrible husband," he said, his voice steady despite the confession. "Not just the affair, though that's unforgivable on its own. But before that, I took you for granted, Vanessa. I expected you to orbit around my career, my needs, my ambitions. I didn't see what you were giving up because I didn't want to see it." I stirred my foe, watching the noodles swirl in the fragrant broth. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I lost everything yesterday. My job, my reputation, possibly my marriage." His voice caught slightly. "And sitting in that corporate meeting this morning, watching everyone's faces as they got the news I already knew, I realized something. I've been chasing the wrong things, prioritizing the wrong things." "And Tara?" I couldn't help asking. "Where does she fit into this epiphany?" He looked down at his bowl. "She doesn't. That's over. Should never have started." "Just like that?" "No, not just like that." He sighed heavily. "The truth is, it was falling apart anyway. She wanted more than I was willing to give, and I was using her to feel better about myself as my career was imploding. It was selfish and destructive, and I'm not proud of any of it. I absorbed this, trying to separate my hurt pride from my actual feelings." "Did you love her?" The question hung in the air between us, dangerous and necessary. "No," Marcus answered, his gaze direct. "I was infatuated, flattered by her attention when I felt like a failure everywhere else. But love? No, I didn't love her." "And me?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "Do you love me, or am I just the safe harbor you're scrambling back to now that your ship is sinking?" Marcus reached across the table, not quite touching me but close enough that I could pull away if I wanted to. "Vanessa, I never stopped loving you. Even when I was at my worst, making the worst decisions of my life, I loved you. I just didn't deserve you." I didn't respond immediately, letting his words settle around me like falling leaves. Beautiful in their way, but ultimately temporary, destined to decompose. "I don't know if I believe you," I said finally. "And even if I did, I don't know if love is enough to rebuild what's been broken." He nodded, accepting this without argument. "I understand, but I want you to know that whether you choose to stay or go, whether you decide our marriage can be saved or not, I support your interview at Preston. I support you reclaiming your career. I should have supported it all along." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt a tiny crack in the wall of anger I'd built around my heart. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That means something." We finished our lunch in a silence that was marginally less strained than before. Afterward, as I cleaned up the containers, Marcus lingered in the doorway. "I have meetings all afternoon. Transition. Planning, exit interviews. But I was thinking, maybe we could have dinner tonight? Not to pressure you, not to make any decisions, just to talk more." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to maintain distance, to protect myself from further hurt. But another part recognized that whatever path forward I chose, reconciliation or separation, would require more conversations like this one. "Dinner," I agreed cautiously. "But I'm cooking, and we eat here, not at some restaurant where we have to pretend everything's fine." Relief flickered across his face. "That sounds perfect. I'll be home by 7. As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Marcus?" He looked back expectantly. "I'm not making any promises. About us, about the future. I need you to understand that." His expression sobered. "I know. I'm just grateful for the chance to talk." After he left, I returned to my interview preparation, but my mind kept drifting back to our lunch conversation. Had it been genuine remorse, or just another performance from a man who excelled at telling people what they wanted to hear? Was I being naive even considering the possibility of hearing him out? I reached for my phone and called the one person who would give me unvarnished truth. "Rachel, it's me. I need your advice." My best friend listened patiently as I recounted my conversation with Marcus, his apparent contrition, his support for my potential return to architecture. "And you're wondering if you should believe him," Rachel said when I finished. "Yes. No. I don't know." I sighed in frustration. "I'm wondering if I'm a complete fool for even talking to him." Rachel was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was measured, careful. "Vanessa, you know I love you, and you know I'd help you bury Marcus in the backyard if that's what you decided to do." Despite everything, I laughed. "I know. But," she continued, "if you're asking me whether you should give him a chance to explain, to try to make amends, that's not something I can answer for you. Only you know what you can forgive, what you can rebuild from." "What would you do?" I pressed. "If it were you? Honestly, I'd probably have set his suits on fire by now." She paused. "But that's me. You've always been more thoughtful, more willing to see the bigger picture. It's what makes you a brilliant architect and a far more forgiving person than I am." I smiled faintly at her assessment. "I'm not sure forgiveness is on the table yet. I'm still in the not committing homicide phase." "A crucial phase," Rachel agreed solemnly. "Look, here's my actual advice. Listen to what he has to say. Really listen. But also listen to yourself, to your instincts, to your needs. You put those aside for 5 years, Vanessa. Don't rush to do it again just because he's showing some belated self-awareness. And the interview? Should I pursue it regardless?" "Absolutely," Rachel said without hesitation. "Whether you stay with Marcus or not, whether his support is genuine or just crisis management, that opportunity is about you. Your talent, your future. Don't let anyone, including me, influence that decision." After we hung up, I sat quietly, letting Rachel's words settle. She was right. Whatever happened with Marcus, I needed to reclaim my own path. For too long, I'd allowed my identity to be subsumed by his. The corporate wife, the perfect hostess, the supportive partner. It was time to remember who Vanessa Mitchell was beyond those roles. With renewed determination, I returned to my portfolio preparation. By late afternoon, I had a compelling presentation that showcased not only my formal architectural training and early career projects, but also the organizational and interpersonal skills I'd developed during my years as essentially the unpaid social director of Marcus's corporate life. I was just saving the final version when my phone rang. Marina's name flashed on the screen. "Please tell me you're still coming for the interview," she said without preamble when I answered. "Hello? To you too, Marina," I laughed. "Yes, I'm still coming. In fact, I was just finishing my portfolio presentation." "Excellent. Because I've just convinced the partners to fast-track this. If you impress them, and you will, we want you on board for the lakefront renewal project. It's exactly the kind of sustainable community design you always talked about." My heart raced at the prospect. "The lakefront project? Marina, that's huge." "It is," she agreed, her voice brimming with the infectious enthusiasm I remembered so well. "And frankly, Vanessa, it has your name all over it. The focus on affordable housing, the green spaces, the community integration, it's everything. You used to sketch out on napkins during our lunch breaks." I felt a lump form in my throat. "You remember those sketches?" "Remember them? I kept some. That's how I convinced the partners you were the right person for this, even after a 5-year hiatus." There was a pause, then she added more gently, "I always knew you'd come back to architecture someday." I just didn't expect it to happen like this. Neither did I admitted. But maybe it had to happen this way. Maybe I needed to hit rock bottom to remember what I really wanted. Well, whatever cosmic forces aligned to bring you back to us, I'm grateful. Marina's voice turned brisk again. Now, I'm sending you the full project brief. Look it over before the interview. The partners will want specific ideas, not just general enthusiasm. I'll be ready, I promised. After we hung up, I felt lightheaded with possibility. The lakefront renewal project was exactly the kind of meaningful work I'd dreamed of doing, using architecture to create community, to solve social problems, to make people's lives better. It was everything Marcus's corporate career wasn't. The irony wasn't lost on me. His betrayal, painful as it was, had cracked open a door I'd long ago resigned myself to seeing closed. Without the twin blows of his affair and impending unemployment, would I ever have reached out to Marina? Would I have continued orbiting his sun, growing dimmer and dimmer until my own light was extinguished entirely? As I prepared dinner that evening, a simple pasta dish, nothing like the elaborate anniversary meal that now seemed a lifetime ago, I contemplated the strange path that had led me here. How endings often disguise themselves as beginnings. How destruction sometimes cleared the way for creation. The front door opened precisely at 7. Marcus entered cautiously, as if unsure of his welcome despite our lunch agreement. He'd changed from his work clothes into jeans and a sweater, an outfit so reminiscent of our early dating days that it gave me momentary pause. "Something smells amazing," he said, hovering at the kitchen entrance. I gestured toward the open bottle of wine on the counter. "Pour yourself a glass if you want. Dinner's almost ready." He complied, then offered to set the table. Another throwback to simpler times, when our household rhythm had been easy, synchronous. As we settled in to eat, Marcus cleared his throat. "How was your day? Did you get more interview prep done?" I twirled pasta onto my fork, considering how much to share. "I did. Actually, Marina called. They're fast-tracking the position because they want someone for the lakefront renewal project." His eyebrows rose. "That's the big urban redevelopment initiative, right? The one that's been in the news?" I nodded, surprised he knew of it. "Yes, it's a massive undertaking, converting old industrial lakefront property into mixed-use development with a focus on affordable housing and sustainability. Vanessa, that's incredible." His smile seemed genuine, untainted by the underlying tension between us. "That's exactly the kind of project you used to talk about wanting to work on." "You remember that?" I asked, echoing my earlier surprise. "With Marina." "Of course I do." He set down his fork, expression earnest. "I remember how passionate you were about ethical urban design, how you used to critique every building we passed on our walks." His smile turned rueful. "I also remember promising you'd have your turn once I was established, another promise I failed to keep." I didn't know how to respond to this unexpected acknowledgement, so I redirected. "Tell me about your day. How did the transition meetings go?" Marcus grimaced slightly. "About as well as you'd expect. Half the team is in shock. The other half is already updating their resumes. David's trying to maintain morale, but it's like bailing water from the Titanic." "And Tara?" I couldn't help asking. "Professionally appropriate," he answered carefully. "Actually, she's being transferred to the Atlanta office as part of the restructuring. She requested it this morning." I absorbed this information, unsure how it made me feel. Relief that she would be physically removed from our lives? Resentment that she could so easily extract herself from the mess she'd helped create? "I see," was all I said. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the weight of unspoken questions hanging between us. Finally, Marcus set down his glass and looked at me directly. "I know you said no promises, Vanessa, and I respect that. But I need to ask, is there anything I can do? Anything at all that would help you see a way forward for us?" I considered his question carefully, resisting the urge to offer platitudes or easy answers. Honesty, I said finally. Complete, unvarnished honesty. About the affair, about your job, about what you really want for the future. I paused, then added, and time. I need time to figure out what I want, independent of you and us. He nodded slowly. I can do honesty, and I can give you time. He hesitated, then added, but if I'm being completely honest, I'm terrified that given time to reconsider, you'll realize you're better off without me. The vulnerability in his admission caught me off guard. This was not the confident, sometimes arrogant Marcus I was accustomed to. Maybe I am better off without you, I said quietly. I don't know yet, but what I do know is that I can't make that decision while I'm still reeling from finding out about you and Tara, while I'm still angry about all the ways you've taken me for granted. I need clarity, and clarity takes time. I understand. He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of mine. For what it's worth, I think you'd be extraordinary on the lakefront project, and I think you should take the job regardless of what happens with us. I studied his face, searching for any sign of manipulation or insincerity. Finding none, I allowed myself a small nod of acknowledgement. Thank you for saying that. As we finished dinner and cleared away the dishes, together in a domestic routine that felt both familiar and strange, I realized something had shifted between us. Not forgiveness, not yet. Not reconciliation, but perhaps the first tentative steps toward honest communication. It wasn't much, but it was something. A foundation, however fragile, on which to build whatever came next. Later, as I prepared for bed in the guest room that had become my temporary sanctuary, I found myself thinking about the interview again. About the possibility of reclaiming the career I'd set aside. About the woman I'd been before I became Mrs. Marcus Mitchell. That woman had been fearless, ambitious, confident in her abilities. She'd believed she could change the urban landscape, create spaces that fostered community and sustainability. She hadn't been perfect. She'd been stubborn, sometimes too idealistic, occasionally short-sighted. But she'd been authentic, true to herself and her values. I wanted to be her again. Whether with Marcus or without him, I wanted to reclaim that sense of purpose, that clarity of vision. As I drifted towards sleep, one thought crystallized with unexpected certainty. Whatever path I chose, it would be my choice this time. Not a compromise, not a sacrifice for someone else's dream. Mine. For the first time since seeing that devastating photo on Instagram, I felt something other than pain and rage. I felt possibility. Fragile, uncertain, but real. Tomorrow would bring more difficult conversations, more decisions to navigate. But tonight, just for a moment, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I was whole again. It was enough to carry me into dreams that weren't haunted by betrayal, but filled instead with blueprints and possibilities, with buildings yet to be designed and a life yet to be reclaimed. Marina's voice echoed in my mind early the next morning, pulling me from a dream where I was standing on the edge of a vast construction site, blueprints clutched in my hands. Vanessa, this is your project now. Your vision. I woke with a start, the dream's clarity lingering as sunlight filtered through the guest room curtains. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt genuinely eager to face the day. I showered and dressed with purpose, choosing an outfit that felt more like the old Vanessa, dark jeans, a structured blazer, and the vintage silver earrings I'd stopped wearing because Marcus once commented they looked unprofessional at a company dinner. Looking in the mirror, I saw glimpses of the woman I used to be, the one who walked into design meetings with confidence and fire. Downstairs, Marcus was already at the kitchen counter, laptop open, fingers typing furiously. He glanced up as I entered, his eyes widening slightly at my appearance. "You look different," he said, clearly searching for the right words. "Good different or bad different?" I asked, pouring myself coffee from the pot he'd made. "Just different. More like—" He hesitated. "More like when we first met." I nodded, accepting this as the observation it was. "I'm meeting Rachel for breakfast, then heading to her office to use her conference room. I need a quiet place to prepare for the interview." "You could use my study," he offered tentatively. "I'll be at the office all day. Transition meetings." I considered the offer, weighing the practicality against my need for emotional distance. "Thanks, but I've already arranged things with Rachel." Disappointment flickered across his face, quickly masked. "Of course. Will you be home for dinner?" "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "I'll text you." He nodded, returning to his laptop as I gathered my portfolio materials and headed out. Rachel was waiting at our favorite cafe, a cozy spot halfway between our houses that had witnessed countless brunches, celebrations, and commiserations over the years. She waved from a corner table, 2 steaming mugs already in front of her. "You look like you again," she said by way of greeting as I slid into the seat across from her. "I feel like me again," I admitted, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "Or at least I'm starting to." Rachel beamed, her copper hair catching the morning light. "This is the Vanessa Mitchell I've missed. So, what's the game plan for today?" I pulled out my tablet, bringing up the portfolio presentation I'd been refining. "Marina sent over the complete lakefront project brief last night. I need to develop some preliminary concept ideas before the interview." I hesitated, then added, "And I need to talk to a financial advisor. Figure out where I stand if you leave Marcus," Rachel finished for me, her expression solemn. "If we separate," I corrected gently. "I haven't made any final decisions yet." Rachel raised an eyebrow but didn't challenge me. "Well, you're in luck. Ben's sister is a financial planner who specializes in divorces and separations. She's agreed to meet you this afternoon." "You already called her?" I asked, surprised. "The moment you texted me that night," Rachel admitted unapologetically. "Look, maybe you'll work things out with Marcus, maybe you won't. But either way, you need to understand your financial options." I couldn't argue with her logic. "Thank you. You're right." "I usually am," she replied with a grin, then grew serious again. "How are things at home? Any more revelations about the Mistress?" I winced at the word Mistress, though I couldn't deny its accuracy. "She's being transferred to Atlanta. Marcus says it's over." "And you believe him?" I stirred my coffee, considering the question. "I believe he regrets getting caught. I believe he's terrified of losing both his job and his marriage in the same week." I looked up at Rachel, meeting her concerned gaze. "But do I believe he wouldn't have continued the affair if I hadn't seen those photos? I'm not sure." Rachel reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "That's a completely valid uncertainty, Vanessa. And it's okay not to have all the answers right now." "I just keep thinking about all the signs I missed," I confessed. "The late nights, the changed passwords, the way he'd turn his phone face down whenever I entered the room. How did I not see what was happening?" "Because you trusted him," Rachel said firmly. "Because trust is the foundation of marriage, and he's the one who broke it, not you." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "Don't you dare blame yourself for his choices, Vanessa Mitchell." Her fierce loyalty brought tears to my eyes. "What would I do without you, Rachel?" "Fortunately, you'll never have to find out," she replied with a gentle smile. "Now, show me this fancy project brief that has you looking more alive than you have in years." We spent the next 2 hours huddled over my tablet, discussing sustainable design principles and community-centered architecture. Rachel, though, not an architect herself, had an eye for aesthetics and a practical perspective that had always complemented my more theoretical approach. By the time we finished our third cup of coffee, I had the outline of a compelling concept presentation for the lakefront project. "This is brilliant, Vanessa," Rachel said, gesturing to the rough sketches I'd made. "The way you've integrated the historical industrial elements while creating modern, accessible spaces, it's exactly what they're looking for." "You think so?" I asked, critical of my own work after so many years away from professional practice. "I know so," she insisted, "and Marina will too." We gathered our things and headed to Rachel's law office, where she'd reserved a conference room for my use. As we walked, a text from Marcus pinged on my phone. "Hope your preparation is going well. The house feels empty without you here." I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Was this genuine sentiment or emotional manipulation? The Marcus I thought I knew wouldn't play such games. But then again, the Marcus I thought I knew wouldn't have cheated on our anniversary. "Everything okay?" Rachel asked, noticing my hesitation. I showed her the text. "I don't know how to read him anymore." Rachel considered the message. "For what it's worth, it seems sincere. But you don't owe him an immediate response, or any response at all right now." She was right, of course. I pocketed my phone without replying and followed her into the sleek office building where she worked. The conference room she'd secured for me was perfect, quiet, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city park. Rachel arranged for lunch to be delivered and promised to return with her sister-in-law, Diane, the financial advisor, at 2:00. "Call if you need anything," she said, heading to her own office. "I'll be just down the hall." Alone with my thoughts and my work, I immersed myself in the lakefront project. The more I explored the brief, the more excited I became. This wasn't just any development. It was a chance to transform an abandoned industrial area into a vibrant, sustainable community. Affordable housing units designed with dignity and beauty. Green spaces that invited gathering and recreation. Commercial areas that could support local businesses rather than faceless corporations. This was what I dreamed of doing before I became so caught up in Marcus's career. Before I started measuring my worth by how well I played the role of corporate wife, how elegantly I hosted dinner parties for his clients, how seamlessly I managed our social calendar. I was so absorbed in my work that I barely registered the passage of time until Rachel knocked gently on the door. "Earth to Vanessa," she said, smiling as she entered with a tall, professionally dressed woman. "This is Diane, Ben's sister and financial wizard extraordinaire." Diane stepped forward, extending her hand. "It's good to meet you, Vanessa, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "Thank you for making time on such short notice," I replied, shaking her hand. "That's what family connections are for," she said warmly, setting a portfolio on the conference table. "Rachel's briefed me on your situation. I understand you're exploring your options in case of separation." I nodded, suddenly nervous. "I need to know where I stand financially, what I'd be facing if I decide to move forward with the job in Chicago." Diane's expression was compassionate but businesslike. "Let's start with the basics. What assets do you and your husband share? House, investments, retirement accounts?" For the next hour, we meticulously cataloged my financial life. The house Marcus and I had purchased 3 years ago, the investment portfolio he'd insisted on managing himself, the retirement account I'd largely neglected after leaving my previous architecture position. With each revelation, I felt a mixture of embarrassment and alarm. How had I allowed myself to become so financially dependent? How had I surrendered so much control? "I should have paid more attention," I admitted as Diane took notes. "You'd be surprised how common this is," she assured me. "Especially in marriages where one spouse's career takes precedence. It's not about intelligence or capability. It's about the patterns we fall into." Rachel, who had been silently observing, spoke up. "So what's the bottom line, Di? Where does Vanessa stand?" Diane reviewed her notes before answering. "Better than many in your situation, actually. Illinois is an equitable distribution state. which means marital assets would be divided fairly, though not necessarily equally. She looked up at me. The good news is that the house has appreciated significantly since you purchased it. And since you mentioned your husband received a substantial bonus last year that went into your joint investment account, you'd be entitled to a portion of that. And if I take the job in Chicago? I asked. If I'm the one who leaves? That doesn't mean you forfeit your rights to marital assets, Diane explained, though it might complicate things regarding the house. My advice would be to negotiate a buyout of your equity if he wants to keep it. Relief washed over me. I wasn't destitute. I had options. What about the salary from Preston Architects? Rachel asked. Would that affect alimony considerations? Diane nodded. It could. But given the length of your marriage and the fact that you left your career to support his, you may still have a claim for transitional support, at least for a period of time. As we continued discussing the practical realities of separation, I found myself oddly calm. These were facts, numbers, legal considerations, concrete things I could understand and navigate. So different from the murky emotional terrain I'd been traversing since discovering Marcus's betrayal. One more thing, Diane said as we concluded our meeting. I'd recommend getting copies of all financial documents as soon as possible. Bank statements, investment accounts, retirement plans, everything. Not because I think your husband would hide assets, but because it's always better to have information in hand. I thought of Marcus, frantically making calls after learning about his layoff, and wondered if he'd already started moving money around. The thought made me sad rather than angry. Had we come to this? Suspicion and strategic document gathering? I will, I promised. Thank you for your help, Diane. After she left, Rachel lingered, studying my face. How are you feeling about all this? Weirdly empowered, I admitted, and sad, both at once. She nodded, understanding. That sounds about right. She paused, then asked gently, Do you want me to come home with you? For moral support? I considered the offer, tempted by the security of having my fiercest advocate beside me. But something told me I needed to face Marcus alone, to test the strength of my newfound resolve without Rachel's protective presence. I appreciate it, but I think I need to do this on my own, I said finally. But can I call you afterward? Day or night, she promised, embracing me tightly before we parted. The drive home felt longer than usual, my mind replaying both the exhilarating work on the lakefront project and the sobering financial discussion with Diane. By the time I pulled into our driveway, dusk was settling over the neighborhood, casting long shadows across the colonial-style house Marcus and I had so proudly purchased, the house that now felt more like a stage set than a home. I was surprised to see lights on in the kitchen, and even more surprised by the aroma of cooking food that greeted me as I entered. Marcus stood at the stove, stirring something that smelled surprisingly appetizing. You're cooking, I observed, setting down my portfolio case. He turned, offering a hesitant smile. I thought you might be hungry after a long day. It's just pasta with that sun-dried tomato sauce you like. The thoughtfulness of the gesture momentarily disarmed me. Marcus rarely cooked, claiming lack of time and talent, though I suspected it was more about maintaining certain traditional gender roles in our household. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched despite my lingering anger. That was considerate. He nodded, turning back to the stove. How did the preparation go? For the interview? Well, I think. The project is incredible. Exactly the kind of work I've always wanted to do. I hesitated, then added, I also met with a financial advisor today. His stirring faltered slightly, but his voice remained steady. I see. And what did this advisor tell you? That I have options, I replied simply. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then said softly, I would never try to hurt you financially, Vanessa. Whatever happens between us. I'd like to believe that, I said, the words coming out more bitter than intended. He turned off the stove and faced me, his expression pained. I deserve that. I deserve your distrust. But I want you to know that whatever else I've done wrong, and God knows there's plenty, I wouldn't try to hide money from you or leave you financially vulnerable. I studied his face, searching for deception but finding only what appeared to be genuine remorse. Thank you for saying that. He gestured to the set table. Hungry? We ate in relative silence, the weight of unspoken thoughts filling the space between us. I noticed Marcus had opened a bottle of my favorite Pinot Noir, another uncharacteristically thoughtful touch. I looked at the lakefront project online today, he said eventually. It's impressive. The scope, the vision behind it. I glanced up, surprised. You researched it? He nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. I wanted to understand what's drawing you back to Chicago, to architecture. And? I prompted, curious about his perspective. And I can see why you're excited, he admitted. It's meaningful work, Vanessa, the kind that makes a difference in people's lives. He paused, twirling pasta around his fork. The kind you always talked about doing before you followed me here. The acknowledgement, so simple yet so profound, caught me off guard. For years, Marcus had minimized my architectural ambitions, framing them as interesting hobbies rather than a legitimate career path equal to his own. Yes, I said simply. It is. After dinner, as we cleared the dishes together, Marcus brought up a subject I'd been avoiding. Have you thought about where you'll stay in Chicago? For the interview? I placed a plate in the dishwasher, buying time as I considered my answer. The truth was, I'd been so focused on the interview itself that I hadn't made any concrete plans. Marina offered her guest room, I said finally, but I might book a hotel downtown closer to the office. Marcus nodded, his expression carefully neutral. I could come with you, not to the interview, obviously, but to Chicago. Help you get settled. Maybe see some of our old friends. The suggestion startled me. Why would you do that? He dried his hands on a kitchen towel, his movements deliberate. Because I want to support you, Vanessa. Because I want to show you I mean what I say about prioritizing your career this time. He met my gaze directly. And because I'm not ready to give up on us. My heart constricted painfully. Marcus, I don't think... Just think about it, he interrupted gently. No pressure, it's your decision. After he left the kitchen, I stood alone, hands gripping the counter as I tried to process my conflicting emotions. Part of me was moved by his apparent sincerity, his efforts to make amends. Another part, the part that remembered those Instagram photos, that remembered the countless small betrayals leading up to the big one, remained wary, skeptical. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Everything okay? I typed back. He made dinner, offered to come to Chicago with me for the interview, says he wants to support my career this time. Her response was quick. And what do you want? Such a simple question, such a complicated answer. I wandered into the living room, where Marcus sat reviewing documents related to his severance package. He looked up as I entered, his expression questioning. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I need to do this on my own. The interview, Chicago, all of it. He nodded, disappointment evident, but restrained. I understand. I'm going to book a hotel for 2 nights, I continued. The interview is Wednesday morning, but Marina wants me to meet some of the team Tuesday evening. Makes sense, he agreed, his tone deliberately casual. When will you leave? Tuesday morning. I'll fly back Thursday. I hesitated, then added, I think the space will be good, for both of us. He looked at me then, really looked at me, his eyes reflecting a mix of regret and resignation. "I know I have no right to ask this, but are you meeting the interview team or are you scouting apartments while you're there?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "I'm taking this one step at a time." Marcus nodded, accepting this uncertainty with surprising grace. "Fair enough." That night, as I prepared for bed in what was quickly becoming my room rather than the guest room, I found myself reflecting on the day's events. The productive work session with Rachel, the illuminating financial discussion with Diane, Marcus's unexpected gestures of support. Was this the beginning of genuine change? Or simply the desperate maneuvering of a man who stood to lose everything? I didn't have answers, but as I drifted toward sleep, I realized something important had shifted within me. For the first time since discovering Marcus's betrayal, I was making choices based not on anger or hurt, but on a clearer vision of what I wanted for myself. The lakefront project, financial independence, the freedom to decide my own future. Whatever happened with Marcus, reconciliation or separation, I wouldn't be making that decision from a place of dependency or fear. I would be making it as a woman who had options, who had support, who had remembered her own worth beyond the confines of her marriage. In the darkness of the room that wasn't quite mine but no longer fully his, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. Not the peace of resolution, that was still far off, but the peace that comes from knowing that whatever storms lay ahead, I had found my compass again. The flight to Chicago felt like traveling backward in time. As the plane descended through clouds toward the familiar skyline, I pressed my forehead against the cool window, watching the city where my career had begun, and where it might begin, again, grow larger beneath me. The architecture that had once inspired me daily rose from the shoreline of Lake Michigan, glass and steel monuments to human creativity and ambition. I'd spent the days before my departure in a strange emotional limbo, preparing for my interview while navigating the minefield that my marriage had become. Marcus had been solicitous, almost painfully so, making coffee each morning, asking thoughtful questions about the lakefront project, giving me space when I needed it. His efforts seemed genuine, which only complicated my feelings further. "Welcome back to Chicago, folks," the pilot announced as we touched down. Local time is 11:42 a.m., and it's a beautiful Tuesday morning in the windy city. I closed my eyes briefly, absorbing the moment. Whatever happened in the next few days would change the course of my life, professionally, personally, or both. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. After collecting my luggage, I found Marina waiting in the arrivals area, her tall figure easy to spot in the crowd. She waved enthusiastically, and as I approached, she enveloped me in a warm embrace. "Look at you," she said, holding me at arm's length for inspection. "Still gorgeous, but with that look in your eyes again. I've missed that look." "What look?" I asked, following her toward the parking garage. "Fire," she replied simply. "The one you had when you first walked into my office as a bright-eyed graduate with portfolio full of revolutionary ideas." I smiled, feeling a flush of pleasure at her observation. "It feels good to have it back." In the car, Marina filled me in on the latest office dynamics and personalities I'd be meeting that evening. "The partners are particularly excited about your perspective on community integration," she said, expertly navigating Chicago traffic. "Most of the proposals they've received focus heavily on the architectural elements but neglect the human aspect. Which is exactly why so many urban renewal projects fail," I noted, easily falling into the professional rhythm we'd established years ago. "You can build the most stunning structures in the world, but if they don't serve the community's needs, they become beautiful, expensive failures," Marina finished with a nod. "That's what I told them you'd say." We pulled up to the downtown boutique hotel where I'd booked a room. Not the fanciest in the city, but charming and well located. As Marina helped me with my bags, My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Landed safely? Thinking of you today. Marina noticed my hesitation. Husband checking in? I nodded, putting the phone away without responding. It's complicated. So I gathered from our calls. She studied me for a moment, then said gently, I'm not going to pry Vanessa, but if you need to talk about anything, I'm here. Not just as your potential boss, but as your friend. The genuine concern in her voice touched me. Thank you. I might take you up on that, but right now, I need to focus on preparing for tonight. Absolutely. I'll pick you up at 6. She handed me a folder. Additional information on the people you'll be meeting. Study up. They're expecting brilliance. After she left, I checked into my room, a cozy space with a view of the cityscape, and spent a few moments organizing my things. The comfortable familiarity of Chicago wrapped around me like an old blanket, warm and reassuring. This had been my home once, the place where I'd found my professional footing, where Marcus and I had met and fallen in love during our early career days. I unpacked my carefully selected outfit for the evening, a tailored navy suit that projected confidence, without being severe, and laid out my portfolio materials. Opening my laptop, I reviewed my presentation one last time, making minor adjustments based on Marina's insights. Only then did I allow myself to check my phone again. 2 more texts from Marcus had arrived. Hope the flight was good. Hotel nice? And then, sent 20 minutes later, I know you're busy. Just wanted to wish you good luck tonight. You're going to amaze them. His support seemed sincere, free of the manipulation I might have expected. It would have been easier if he'd been angry about my trip, resentful of my potential career resurrection. His apparent selflessness was harder to dismiss than hostility would have been. I typed a brief response. Landed safely. Hotel is perfect. Thanks for the good wishes. Professional, polite, distant. Setting the phone aside, I moved to the window, gazing out at the city that had once been my playground. 5 years ago, I'd left Chicago with Marcus, packing away not just my possessions but my professional ambitions, telling myself it was a temporary detour. Now I stood at a crossroads, facing the possibility of reclaiming that abandoned path. For the first time since seeing those damning Instagram photos, I allowed myself to truly consider what I wanted. Not what would hurt Marcus most, not what others expected of me, but what Vanessa Mitchell, stripped of her roles as wife and hostess, and corporate +1, truly desired. I wanted to create spaces that mattered. I wanted to wake up every morning feeling the fire Marina had noticed in my eyes. I wanted to reclaim the woman who'd been slowly disappearing inside a marriage that, even before the betrayal, had become increasingly one-sided. And Marcus? The answer there was less clear. 5 years of marriage, of shared history and dreams, couldn't be erased by one catastrophic breach of trust. But they couldn't be preserved by nostalgia and fear of change either. I turned away from the window and returned to my laptop, determined to focus on the immediate challenge, impressing the partners at Preston Architects. Hours later, dressed, in my navy suit with the vintage silver earrings that had once been my professional signature, I stood in the lobby waiting for Marina. My portfolio was polished, my presentation rehearsed, my concepts refined. Whatever personal turmoil swirled, in my private life I was professionally prepared. Marina arrived precisely at 6, looking elegant in a crimson dress that complemented her dark complexion beautifully. Ready to dazzle them? As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, taking a deep breath. The restaurant Marina had chosen was an upscale establishment overlooking Millennium Park, the kind of place where business deals were shaped over exquisite food and carefully selected wine. As we entered, she directed me toward a private dining area where 4 people, 2 men and 2 women, were already seated. Everyone, this is Vanessa Mitchell, Marina announced as we approached. The architect I've been telling you about for years. The introductions were a blur of names and titles, Jonathan Chen, managing partner, Sophia Rodriguez, head of sustainable design, Michael Thompson, project director, and Layla Washington, community liaison. Each greeted me with curious appraisal, clearly measuring me against whatever Marina had told them. "We've heard remarkable things about your work," Jonathan began once we were seated, "though there's been a noticeable gap in your portfolio recently. A detour, not a dead end," I replied smoothly. "Sometimes life takes us on unexpected journeys. What matters is what we learn along the way." "And what have you learned during your detour?" Sophia asked, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. I considered my answer carefully. That architecture isn't just about creating beautiful buildings. It's about listening to communities, to environments, to needs that often go unexpressed. I paused, meeting each of their gazes in turn. During my time away from formal practice, I've had the opportunity to observe how people actually interact with spaces, rather than how we anticipate they will. That perspective has deepened my understanding of what makes architecture truly successful. Something shifted in the atmosphere, a subtle relaxation, an opening of possibility. "Tell us about your initial thoughts on the lakefront project," Michael prompted. "Marina mentioned you've been reviewing the brief." For the next 2 hours, over excellent food and lively conversation, I outlined my vision for transforming the abandoned industrial site into a thriving, inclusive community. I emphasized sustainable materials, adaptable spaces, preservation of historical elements that honored the area's working-class roots, and design features that would foster community connection rather than isolation. "What impresses me," Layla said as dessert was served, "is that you're not just talking about buildings, you're talking about people, about lives. That's refreshingly uncommon in these initial discussions." "The lakefront area was once the economic heart of its community," I replied. "Workers built their lives around those factories and warehouses. Any redevelopment that doesn't honor that history, that doesn't create new opportunities for community building, would be a failure regardless of its aesthetic merits." Jonathan leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Bold words from someone who hasn't officially rejoined the profession?" "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "but sometimes perspective requires distance." By the time we left the restaurant, the dynamic had shifted distinctly in my favor. The initial wariness had given way to engaged interest, and even Jonathan, clearly the most skeptical, had invited me to elaborate on several of my ideas during the formal interview the following morning. "You killed it," Marina murmured as we waited for our cars at the valet stand. "Did you see Sophia's face when you talked about incorporating solar collection into the historical facade elements? She's practically ready to offer you her job." I laughed, feeling a rush of professional confidence I hadn't experienced in years. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. The formal interview is still tomorrow." "A formality at this point," Marina insisted. "They want you, Vanessa. The question is, do you want them? Did I?" The evening had rekindled all the passion I'd once felt for architectural design, for creating spaces that improved lives. The prospect of leading the lakefront project, of returning to Chicago, of building something meaningful filled me with excitement. But it also meant decisions about Marcus, about our marriage, about the life we'd built together, however flawed that life had proven to be. Back in my hotel room, I found a text from Rachel. "How did it go? Did you dazzle them with your brilliance?" I smiled, typing back. "I think I might have. Formal interview tomorrow, but it went well. Really well." As I changed into my night clothes, I noticed another message from Marcus. "Hope. The dinner went well. The house feels strange without you here. I'm discovering I don't like being alone with my thoughts. Maybe that's been part of the problem all along." His unexpected vulnerability caught me off guard. This was a side of Marcus I'd rarely seen, reflective, uncertain, almost philosophical. Was this genuine introspection or another form of manipulation, consciously or unconsciously designed to tug at my empathy? I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his message, unsure how to respond. Finally, I typed, "The dinner went well. Team seems receptive to my ideas." Brief, professional, but not deliberately cold. His response came quickly. "I never doubted they would be. You've always been brilliant, Vanessa. I'm sorry I didn't say that enough." I set the phone down without replying, suddenly overwhelmed by the complexity of my feelings. Anger at his betrayal still simmered beneath the surface, but it was increasingly tangled with memories of better times, with the history we'd built together, with the man I'd thought I'd married. Turning off the lights, I lay in the unfamiliar hotel bed, listening to the distant sounds of Chicago traffic below. Tomorrow would bring the formal interview, another step toward reclaiming my professional identity. But it would also bring me closer to decisions I wasn't yet ready to make. Sleep came fitfully, my dreams a chaotic blend of architectural drawings that kept changing shape and rooms where doors disappeared as soon as I approached them. I woke before dawn, watching the gradual illumination of the Chicago skyline as the sun rose. Rather than trying to fall back asleep, I got up and prepared for the day ahead, channeling my nervous energy into careful preparation. The formal interview was scheduled for 9 a.m. at the Preston Architect's office, a sleek modern space occupying 3 floors of a downtown high-rise. Marina met me in the lobby, her expression confident. "Just be yourself," she advised as we rode the elevator to the 28th floor. "The person I've known for years, not whoever you've been pretending to be in corporate wife mode." I smiled at her blunt assessment. "Is that how you see what happened to me? That I was pretending?" Marina considered this as the elevator ascended. "Not consciously, perhaps. But yes, I think you were playing a role, one that got more demanding and less satisfying over time." She glanced at me, her gaze direct. "Am I wrong?" I sighed, recognizing the truth in her words. "No, you're not wrong. I just didn't realize how far I'd drifted from myself until recently. Well, the Vanessa I'm seeing today is the real deal," she said as the elevator doors opened. "Hold on to her." The interview itself was more rigorous than the previous evening's dinner, but also more exhilarating. I presented my concept designs for the lakefront project, fielded technical questions about sustainability features, construction methodologies, and budget considerations, and engaged in detailed discussions about community integration and historical preservation. Throughout it all, I felt completely in my element, confident, knowledgeable, passionate. This was who I had been before I set aside my career for Marcus's. This was who I could be again. "One final question, Ms. Mitchell," Jonathan said as the interview neared its conclusion. "Given your hiatus from professional practice, how quickly do you believe you could effectively lead a project of this magnitude?" I met his gaze steadily. "Architecture isn't like muscle memory, Mr. Chen. It doesn't atrophy with disuse. My understanding of design principles, sustainable practices, and community needs has continued to evolve even during my time away from formal practice. What's more, the perspective I've gained during that period offers unique insights that someone who's been continuously in the field might miss." I leaned forward slightly. "I could begin tomorrow and hit the ground running." A smile spread slowly across his face. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." He exchanged glances with the other partners, then turned back to me. "We'll need to confer, of course, but I believe I speak for everyone when I say we've been extremely impressed with your presentation and your vision for the lakefront project." "Extremely," Sophia echoed, her earlier reserve completely dissolved. "You've brought fresh perspectives to challenges we've been wrestling with for months. After final handshakes and promises of a decision within days, not weeks, Marina escorted me from the conference room, barely containing her excitement until we were alone in the elevator. That, she declared triumphantly, was a masterclass in how to nail an interview. Jonathan never smiles during these things. Never. I leaned against the elevator wall, suddenly drained but elated. It felt right, Marina. All of it. The questions, the project, being back in a design environment. It felt like coming home. Because it is home, she said simply. This is where you belong, Vanessa. This is what you were meant to do. As we exited the building into the bright Chicago morning, Marina looked at her watch. I've got a client meeting in 30 minutes. Will you be okay exploring on your own this afternoon? We could meet for dinner later if you'd like. I'd like that, I agreed. But first, I think I need to walk, clear my head, process what just happened. She squeezed my arm affectionately. You're going to get this job, Vanessa, and when you do, your life is going to change in all the best ways. After she left, I found myself drawn toward the lakefront, toward the very area we'd been discussing transforming. I walked for nearly an hour, eventually reaching the abandoned industrial zone that the Preston project would revitalize. Standing at a chain-link fence surrounding the property, I gazed at the crumbling warehouses and empty lots that held so much potential. In my mind's eye, I could already see what this space could become. The affordable housing units with dignified design, the community gardens, the repurposed factory buildings housing local businesses and cultural centers. This was what I dreamed of doing when I first chose architecture as my path. Not designing luxury condos for the wealthy or corporate headquarters for faceless companies, but creating spaces that lifted communities, that honored history while building toward a more equitable future. As I stood there, imagining possibilities, my phone rang. Rachel's name flashed on the screen. Well, she demanded without preamble when I answered. How did it go? Are they begging you to take the job yet? I laughed, her enthusiasm infectious even through the phone. It went really well. They seemed genuinely impressed, and Jonathan, the managing partner who Marina warned me rarely shows emotion, actually smiled. Of course he did, Rachel declared, because you're brilliant and they'd be idiots not to hire you on the spot. They said they'll decide within days, I told her, turning away from the site and beginning to walk back toward downtown. But even if they don't offer me the position, this experience has been clarifying. Clarifying how? She asked, her tone shifting to serious. I paused, searching for the right words. It reminded me who I am, Rachel, who I was before. I became so focused on being the perfect corporate wife that I forgot to be myself. And Marcus, has this trip clarified anything there? I sighed, the question bringing all my conflicted feelings back to the surface. That's more complicated. He's been different since everything happened. Supportive about this interview. Reflective about our marriage. Last night he texted that he doesn't like being alone with his thoughts. That maybe that's been part of our problem. Rachel hummed non-committally. Convenient timing for this sudden self-awareness. No, I acknowledged. That's what makes this so difficult. Is he genuinely changing? Or is he just desperate because his professional and personal lives are both imploding simultaneously? Only time will answer that, Rachel said wisely. The real question is whether you're willing to give him that time. Was I? The anger that had initially fueled my decisions was cooling, replaced by a more complex emotional landscape. I wasn't ready to forgive Marcus's betrayal, but I was beginning to see our marriage in a more nuanced light, recognizing my own role in its gradual erosion, not as justification for his affair, but as context for the distance that had grown between us. I don't know yet, I admitted. I need to figure out who I am independently of him first. Need to reclaim pieces of myself that got lost along the way. That, Rachel said firmly. Sounds like the healthiest thing I've heard you say in years. After we hung up, I continued walking, letting the familiar energy of Chicago flow through me. By the time I returned to my hotel, it was mid-afternoon. I had hours before my dinner with Marina, time to rest, to prepare for my flight home. The following day, to continue processing all that had happened. As I entered my room, my phone buzzed with an email notification from Jonathan Chen. Ms. Mitchell, the partners and I have concluded our discussion far earlier than anticipated. We would like to offer you the position of Senior Project Architect for the Lakefront Renewal Project, effective immediately. Marina can discuss the details of the compensation package, but I wanted to personally express how impressed we were with your presentation and your vision. We believe you are exactly what this project needs. Please let us know your decision at your earliest convenience. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, staring at the message in disbelief. They weren't just offering me the job. They were offering it immediately, without the usual days or weeks of deliberation. The vote of confidence was overwhelming. Almost without conscious thought, I found myself calling Marina. They offered me the job, I said when she answered, my voice shaking slightly. Jonathan just emailed me. I know, she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. He called me right after they sent the offer. Vanessa, they want you. To start as soon as possible. 2 weeks if you can manage it. 2 weeks. The time frame hit me like a physical blow. Not because it was too soon professionally. I was ready, eager even, to dive back into meaningful work. But personally, 2 weeks meant immediate decisions about my marriage, my home, my entire life structure. I need to think, I said, as much to myself as to Marina. This changes everything. It changes what needed changing, she replied gently. The rest is up to you. After we hung up, I paced the hotel room, my mind racing with implications and possibilities. The job offer was everything I could have hoped for, a chance to do meaningful work, to reclaim my professional identity, to create something lasting and significant. But it also forced immediate decisions about Marcus, about our shared home, about the life we'd built together over 5 years of marriage. I found myself standing at the window again, looking out at the Chicago skyline now bathed. In late afternoon light, the city seemed to be offering itself back to me, a place where I'd once been fully myself, where I could be that person again. Could I rebuild my career here while also trying to rebuild my marriage? Could Marcus and I find our way back to each other in this new context, with me no longer orbiting his professional sun, but pursuing my own path? Or would the physical distance only confirm what the emotional distance had already suggested, that we had grown too far apart, that his betrayal had merely been the final crack in a foundation that had been weakening for years? I didn't have answers yet, but for the first time since discovering those Instagram photos, I felt capable of finding them, not from a place of reactive anger or wounded pride, but from a centered sense of my own worth and capabilities. Whatever decisions awaited me back home, I would face them as the Vanessa Mitchell who had just confidently presented revolutionary design concepts to some of Chicago's most respected architects. The Vanessa who had fire in her eyes again. The Vanessa who was reclaiming herself, piece by piece, from the ashes of betrayal. I reached for my phone and typed a message to Marcus. They offered me the job. Senior Project Architect for the Lakefront Renewal Project. They want me to start in 2 weeks. His response came almost immediately. Congratulations, Vanessa. I'm genuinely happy for you. We should talk when you get home. Yes, I thought, setting the phone down. We certainly should. 2 months had transformed everything. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new Chicago apartment, coffee mug in hand, watching the early autumn sun glint off Lake Michigan. The view still stunned me each morning, a daily reminder of how drastically life could change in such a short time. Behind me, architectural drawings and material samples covered the dining table I'd repurposed as a workstation. The lakefront project was moving forward at a remarkable pace, my initial concepts already evolving into detailed plans under the collaborative efforts of our talented team. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and I smiled when I saw Rachel's name. Despite the distance, she'd remained my emotional anchor throughout this transition. "Please tell me you're not already working," she said when I answered. "It's Saturday, Vanessa. Normal humans sleep in on Saturdays." "I've been up for hours," I admitted, moving back to the windows. "The light on the lake at sunrise is incredible. I'm thinking about incorporating similar lighting effects in the community center design." Rachel laughed. "Listen to you. So inspired, so productive. This is the Vanessa I remember." "It feels good," I agreed, settling onto the window seat. That had become my favorite spot in the apartment. Sometimes I can hardly believe how much has happened since that night. "The anniversary from hell," Rachel said, her tone softening. "How are you feeling about all of it now? With some distance?" I considered the question, watching a sailboat cut across the blue waters below. The raw pain of Marcus's betrayal had dulled over the past months, transformed into something more complex. A mixture of sadness for what was lost, gratitude for what I'd found, and a growing acceptance that some endings, however painful, were necessary. "I'm okay," I said finally. "Better than okay, actually. The work is challenging in all the right ways, the team respects my input, and I'm designing spaces that will actually improve people's lives." "And Marcus?" Rachel asked carefully. "Have you made any decisions there?" I sipped my coffee, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest whenever his name came up. We're still in this strange limbo. The separation agreement is working for now. I'm here, he's there. We touch base occasionally about practical matters. But we haven't filed for divorce. Do you want to? Some days, I admitted. Other days, I find myself remembering the good parts, who we were before everything fell apart. Then I wonder if there's anything worth salvaging. Has he kept his promise to get therapy? I nodded, though she couldn't see me. Yes. And he's been respectful of my space, my career move. No guilt trips, no manipulation. It's unexpected. People can change, Rachel acknowledged, especially when they hit rock bottom. The question is whether it's enough. The conversation shifted to lighter topics. Rachel's latest courtroom victory, her plans to visit me the following month, the Chicago restaurants she insisted I try. By the time we hung up, the sun had risen fully, bathing my apartment in warm light. I returned to the dining table, reviewing the community feedback we'd gathered at yesterday's neighborhood meeting. The residents' insights were invaluable. Concerns about gentrification, hopes for job creation, desires for green spaces and cultural centers that honored the area's industrial history. Incorporating their needs into our design was exactly the kind of challenge that energized me. I became so engrossed in sketching modifications that I lost track of time, startled when my phone rang hours later. Marina's name flashed on the screen. "Are you coming? Everyone's already here." I glanced at the clock, horrified to discover it was nearly noon. The team brunch. I completely lost track of time. "I'm so sorry. Working on a Saturday again?" Marina surmised, amusement in her voice. "I created a monster. Just get here when you can. We've ordered enough mimosas to keep everyone happy until you arrive." I promised to be there in 30 minutes, then rushed to shower and dress, choosing a casual outfit that still projected the professional confidence I'd reclaimed since moving back to Chicago. As I gathered my things, I noticed a text that had arrived during my work absorption. "Hope your weekend is going well. Weather here has finally cooled down. The maple in the backyard is starting to turn. Always was your favorite time of year." Marcus's message was typical of our recent communications. Friendly, slightly nostalgic, careful to respect boundaries while maintaining connection. I typed a quick response. Busy morning working on community feedback integration. About to meet the team for brunch. Hope your weekend is good too. The restaurant Marina had chosen was a trendy spot in Wicker Park, its industrial chic aesthetic, reflecting the neighborhood's artistic transformation. I spotted our group immediately, Marina's distinctive laugh rising above the brunch crowd, surrounded by the team I'd come to respect deeply over the past 2 months. "She's alive!" Jonathan called out as I approached, raising his mimosa in mock toast. "We were about to send a search party to rescue you from your drafting table." I slid into the empty seat they'd saved for me, accepting the mimosa. Sophia pushed my way. I got caught up in the community feedback analysis. There are some fascinating perspectives about the warehouse conversion. "No shop talk for at least 20 minutes, Marina interrupted, passing me a menu. "Team rule. First, food and gossip, then work." I laughed, accepting the gentle reprimand. This was another change in my life. Colleagues who insisted on work-life balance, who valued personal connection alongside professional excellence. "Fine. Then, gossip me," I challenged, settling into the comfortable camaraderie that had developed among us. For the next hour, conversation flowed freely. Talk of weekend plans, architectural exhibits worth seeing, Michael's recent engagement, Layla's daughter starting kindergarten. These people weren't just colleagues anymore. They were becoming friends. "So, Vanessa," Jonathan said as we finished our meals, finally allowing the conversation to turn professional. "I heard the community response to your preservation concepts was overwhelmingly positive." I nodded, enthusiasm bubbling up as I described the residents' reactions to our initial designs. The integration of historical elements really resonated, especially with the older community members who worked in the factories before they closed. They could see themselves in the space, their history respected, not erased. "That's exactly why we needed you on this project," Sophia said, leaning forward. "You understand that architecture isn't just about buildings. It's about people, about memory, about creating future history." The praise warmed me, especially coming from Sophia, whose own work in sustainable design I'd long admired. It's what drew me to architecture in the first place, the human element. I think I lost sight of that for a while. "Well, you've certainly found it again," Marina observed. "The community engagement stats for this project are breaking company records." As brunch evolved into an impromptu strategy session, I found myself marveling at how natural this felt, collaborating with peers who valued my perspective, working on a project that aligned with my deepest professional values. The contrast with my previous life as Marcus's corporate wife couldn't have been more stark. Later, walking back to my apartment through streets vibrant with weekend activity, I reflected on the past 2 months, the whirlwind of relocating, immersing myself in the lakefront project, establishing a new daily rhythm independent of my marriage. The transition hadn't been without challenges. There had been nights when I'd woken disoriented, reaching for Marcus in an empty bed, days when doubts crept in, when I questioned whether I'd made the right choice in accepting the job and moving back to Chicago while our marriage remained in limbo. But those moments had grown less frequent as I settled into my new life, a life increasingly shaped by my own choices rather than compromises made for someone else's dreams. My phone buzzed with a text from Marina. Jonathan just emailed. City. Council approved our variance request for the adaptive reuse elements. Green light to proceed with detailed design phase. I smiled, quickening my pace toward home, eager to adjust my designs based on this latest development. The lakefront project was becoming more than just a professional opportunity. It was becoming my redemption story, proof that detours and setbacks could lead to something even better than originally planned. At my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and moved directly to my work table, barely registering the passage of time as I immersed myself in architectural possibilities. When my phone rang hours later, darkness had fallen outside my windows, the lake now a vast blackness dotted with the lights of distant boats. "Marcus calling," flashed on the screen, and I felt the familiar flutter of complicated emotions his name always triggered. I took a deep breath before answering. "Vanessa," his voice came through, warm and slightly hesitant. "Is this a good time?" "It's fine," I said, moving to my window seat. "Just working on some design adjustments. What's up?" "I just wanted to check in," he said. "It's been a couple of weeks since we've talked." He was right. Our communication had settled into a pattern of occasional texts, with actual conversations growing increasingly rare. Part of our separation agreement had been to give each other space, time to reassess what we wanted individually before making any final decisions about our marriage. "How are you?" I asked, genuine curiosity in my question. Despite everything, I still cared about his well-being. "Managing," he replied. "The consulting work is picking up. 3 new clients this month." "That's great," I said, meaning it. After his layoff, Marcus had decided to establish his own business consulting practice rather than seeking another corporate position, a choice that had surprised me, given his previous attachment to corporate hierarchy and status. "And the therapy is..." He hesitated. "Challenging but clarifying. Dr. Patterson doesn't pull punches." "I'm glad you're sticking with it," I said softly. "How about you?" he asked. "The project moving forward?" "We just got approval for the adaptive reuse variants," I told him, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. "It means we can preserve more of the original industrial structures than initially thought possible. That's the part that matters most to you, isn't it? Honoring what came before while building something new." His insight caught me off guard, not because it was wrong, but because it was so perceptively right. Yes, exactly that. A brief silence stretched between us, comfortable in a way that reminded me of our early relationship, before ambition and compromise had complicated everything. "Vanessa," he said finally, "I've been thinking. It's been 2 months since you moved to Chicago. Maybe it's time we talk about what happens next. With us." I tensed slightly, though I'd been expecting this conversation. "What are you thinking?" "I'd like to see you," he said simply. "Not to pressure you or make demands. Just to talk, face to face. It's hard to navigate this over phone calls and texts." He was right about that. Our separation had provided necessary space for individual healing, but it had also created a conversational distance that made meaningful discussion of our future difficult. "When?" I asked, surprising myself with my willingness to consider his request. "I could come to Chicago," he offered. "Next weekend, maybe? I wouldn't expect to stay with you," he added quickly. "I'd get a hotel." I considered his proposal, weighing my readiness for such a meeting against the reality that decisions would eventually need to be made about our marriage, one way or another. "Okay," I said finally. "Next weekend could work. I'm free on Saturday." "Saturday it is," he replied, relief evident in his voice. "Thank you, Vanessa." After we hung up, I remained at the window, watching the distant lights on the lake, trying to identify what I was feeling. Anxiety, certainly. Curiosity about what Marcus wanted to discuss. But also a strange calm. A confidence that whatever happened, I would be okay. The woman who had stood in shock in her dining room, staring at Instagram photos that shattered her world, was not the same woman who now contemplated meeting her estranged husband. That Vanessa had been defined largely by her relationship to Marcus. This Vanessa was defined by her own capabilities, her own vision, her own strength. The week passed in a blur of project milestones and preparation. Our team finalized the schematic design phase, incorporating community feedback into an evolving vision for the lakefront redevelopment. I found myself working late most evenings, partly driven by professional commitment and partly by nervous energy about Marcus's impending visit. By Friday afternoon, Marina noticed my distraction during our weekly team meeting. "Everything okay?" she asked as the others filed out. "You seemed somewhere else today." I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Marcus is coming to Chicago tomorrow. We're meeting to talk about next steps, I guess." Marina's expression shifted to concern. "Are you ready for that conversation?" "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants clarity, resolution. Another part is afraid of what that resolution might be. She studied me for a moment. "What are you afraid of exactly? That you might decide to end the marriage permanently? Or that you might decide to give it another chance?" The question struck at the heart of my confusion. "Both," I said finally. "What does it say about me if I walk away from 5 years of marriage because of one terrible betrayal? But what does it say if I don't? If I go back to someone who could hurt me that way?" Marina leaned against the conference table, her expression thoughtful. "Those are questions only you can answer, Vanessa. But for what it's worth, neither choice defines your character. They're just different paths forward." I nodded, grateful for her perspective. "How did you get so wise about relationships?" She laughed. "3 marriages, 2 divorces, and a current partner who thankfully accepts that I'm better at designing buildings than maintaining conventional relationship structures." Her expression softened. "Just remember that whatever you decide, your life here is secure. The work, the team, your place in this firm, all of that stands independently of your personal decisions." Her reassurance meant more than she could know. During my years as Marcus's wife, my identity had become so entwined with his that major life decisions were rarely mine alone. Now, facing perhaps the biggest decision of all, I had created a foundation that was entirely my own. Professional, success and security that wouldn't crumble regardless of what happened in my marriage. "Thank you," I said simply. "That helps more than you know." Saturday morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of perfect autumn day that had always been my favorite in Chicago. I dressed carefully, selecting an outfit that felt like the person I'd become, a burgundy sweater and tailored black pants that projected confidence without formality. Marcus and I had agreed to meet at a small cafe near the lake, neutral territory that held no memories for either of us. I arrived early, securing a table by the window where I could watch for his approach. He appeared precisely on time, walking along the lakefront path with the familiar stride I'd know anywhere. He looked different somehow, the corporate polish softened, his typical suit replaced by dark jeans and a navy blazer, his hair slightly longer than he'd ever worn it during our marriage. When he spotted me through the window, his face brightened with a smile that carried echoes of our early days together. I felt an unexpected flutter in my chest. Not exactly longing, but a recognition of the history between us, the connection that remained despite everything. "Vanessa," he said warmly as he reached the table, hesitating briefly before leaning in to kiss my cheek. "You look wonderful." "Thank you," I replied, gesturing to the seat across from me. "So do you. Different, but good different." He smiled at my echo of our earlier conversation. "The consulting work doesn't require the same corporate facade. It's been liberating, actually." After ordering coffee, we fell into surprisingly easy conversation about surface matters. My apartment with its lake view, his progress establishing his consulting practice, mutual friends we'd stayed in touch with. It was only when our coffees arrived that Marcus steered toward deeper waters. "I've missed you, Vanessa. Not just as my wife, but as my friend. The person who always saw things from angles I missed." His sincerity was disarming. "I've missed aspects of us too," I admitted. "The good parts, before things got complicated." He nodded, cradling his mug between his hands. "That's part of what I've been working on in therapy. Understanding how we got from there to here. How I went from the man who would have done anything for you to someone who could hurt you so deeply." I tensed slightly, uncertain whether I was ready to revisit the betrayal that had sent our lives in separate directions. Sensing my discomfort, Marcus continued carefully. I'm not trying to reopen wounds, Vanessa. Just to share that I've been doing the work you asked me to do. Looking hard at myself, at the choices I made, at the person I became in that corporate world. And what have you found? I asked, genuinely curious about his self-reflection. He looked out toward the lake, for a moment gathering his thoughts. That I lost myself. That somewhere along the way I started measuring my worth by my title, my salary, my position in the corporate hierarchy. And when that started crumbling, when I knew the layoffs were coming but couldn't admit it, I looked for validation elsewhere. He met my eyes directly. It wasn't about you, Vanessa. It was never about you not being enough. It was about me feeling like I wasn't enough. The insight surprised me, not because it excused his actions, but because it aligned with patterns I'd observed but never fully articulated, even to myself. Why couldn't you talk to me about it? I asked, the question that had haunted me for months. About the company struggles, the potential layoffs. We were supposed to be partners. Pride, he answered without hesitation. Toxic, ridiculous, pride. I'd cast myself as the provider, the successful one. Admitting failure felt like you were failing me. I finished for him. He nodded, which is precisely what I ended up doing anyway, in a far worse way. We fell silent, each absorbing the weight of this acknowledgement. I've been doing my own reflecting, I said. Eventually. About my role and how distant we became. Not the affair, that was entirely your choice. But the drift that happened before that. Marcus looked at me attentively, waiting for me to continue. I let myself disappear, I said, the realization still painful to articulate. Year by year, I set aside more of who I was to fit into the role of corporate wife. I stopped challenging you, stopped pursuing my own ambitions, became this, accessory to your career. I never wanted that, Marcus said softly. I fell in love with your fire, your vision. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing that it was fading. We both stopped seeing a lot of things, I acknowledged. He reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but close. The question is, where does that leave us now? You're flourishing in Chicago, reconnected with your passion. I'm rebuilding in a new direction. Are we rebuilding together or separately? The directness of his question demanded equal honesty in return. I don't know yet, I admitted. Part of me wonders if we're just too different now. If we've grown in directions that can't be reconciled. And the other part? He prompted gently. Wonders if what we're becoming might actually fit together better than who we were, I said, surprising myself with the admission. The Marcus sitting across from me now seems more like the man I originally fell in love with than the person you became in those corporate years. Hope flickered in his eyes. I feel the same way. The Vanessa I'm talking to today reminds me of the woman whose passion for architecture captivated me from our first date. Brilliant, determined, lit from within. We gazed at each other across the table, the weight of 5 years of marriage, one devastating betrayal, and 2 months of separation hanging between us. I'm not ready to make a final decision, I said finally. About us, about divorce or reconciliation. I need more time. I understand, he said, disappointment evident but controlled. Can I ask for something in the meantime? What's that? A real date, he said simply. Not today, but maybe next time I visit. Dinner, no pressure, just starting fresh, getting to know who we are now. The request was modest, reasonable, and unexpectedly appealing. I'd like that, I said, realizing I meant it. Relief softened. His features. Thank you for being willing to even consider it after everything. We left the cafe and walked along the lakefront, our conversation shifting to lighter topics. His mother's recent retirement, a book we'd both happened to read, small connections that reminded me of the friendship that had once been the foundation of our relationship. When it was time for him to leave for his hotel, we stood facing each other somewhat awkwardly, neither quite sure how to say goodbye. "I'm glad you came," I said honestly. This was clarifying in a good way. "For me too," he agreed. "I've missed Chicago almost as much as I've missed you." The comment sparked a thought. Would you ever consider moving back if things were different between us? The question clearly caught him off guard. I hadn't let myself think that far ahead, he admitted. But yes, I think I would. My consulting work could be based anywhere, and Chicago always felt more like home than where we moved for the corporate position. I nodded, filing this information away, another piece in the complex puzzle of our potential future. "Safe travels tomorrow," I said as we prepared to part ways. "Let me know when you get home." "I will," he promised. Then, with a hint of his old confidence, "And I'll be planning that date. Something worthy of the new Vanessa Mitchell, senior project architect extraordinaire." I laughed, appreciating the lightness he'd brought to our farewell. I look forward to it. As I watched him walk away, I felt a curious mixture of emotions, lingering hurt from the past, cautious hope for the future, and a surprising certainty that whatever happened between us, I would be okay. The Vanessa who had discovered her husband's betrayal on their anniversary night had felt destroyed, her identity and future shattered along with her trust. The Vanessa who now returned to her apartment, her own space, filled with evidence of her professional renaissance, knew better. I was not defined by Marcus's choices, by his betrayal, or even by whether our marriage ultimately survived or ended. I was defined by my own resilience, by the vision I brought to my work, by the person I was becoming through this unexpected detour. Back at my apartment, I moved to the window seat, watching twilight settle over the lake. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. How did it go with Marcus? I considered how to encapsulate the complex emotions of the day, finally settling on simple honesty, better than expected, clarifying. We're going to try a real date next time he visits. Taking it slow. Her response came quickly. Whatever you decide, I've got your back, but I'm glad it was clarifying. That's more than most people get after betrayal. She was right. Many relationships shattered by infidelity never reached this point of measured communication, of mutual acknowledgement of deeper issues. Whether Marcus and I ultimately found our way back to each other or confirmed that separate paths were best, we were navigating this crossroads with growing maturity and self-awareness. Setting down my phone, I turned my attention to the architectural drawings that had been occupying my professional focus. The lakefront project continued to evolve, community input shaping our design decisions, technical challenges demanding creative solutions, our team's collective vision gradually transforming into concrete plans for actual construction. In many ways, it paralleled my personal journey, taking damaged foundations and deciding what to preserve, what to demolish, what to rebuild in new forms. The abandoned industrial site would never return to what it had once been, just as my marriage could never unexperience the betrayal that had altered its foundation. But something valuable could still emerge from the ruins, something perhaps stronger, more authentic, more aligned with present needs rather than past patterns. As night fell completely, the lights of Chicago forming a glittering backdrop beyond my windows, I allowed myself to acknowledge a truth I'd been reluctant to face. Part of me still loved Marcus. Not blindly, not with the unquestioning trust of before, but with a more measured, clear-eyed affection for the person he had been and might be again. Whether that love was enough to rebuild a marriage remained to be seen. But recognizing its presence, allowing it to exist alongside the pain and anger without being consumed by either, felt like another step in my ongoing journey of reclamation, of My career, my independence, and most importantly, my capacity to choose my own path forward. Tomorrow would bring more work on the lakefront project, more decisions about balancing preservation with innovation, more collaboration with colleagues who had become friends. And in the coming weeks, it would also bring another visit from Marcus, another opportunity to evaluate whether our individual evolutions might create a new compatibility or confirm our permanent divergence. For tonight, it was enough to know that I stood on solid ground of my own making, no longer defined by betrayal, no longer reactive in my choices, but moving forward with the steady purpose of a woman who had rediscovered her own worth. The light on Lake Michigan shifted with passing clouds, patterns of darkness and illumination constantly changing, much like life itself, I reflected. 2 months ago, I could never have imagined standing here, professionally fulfilled and personally stronger, contemplating a possible new chapter with the man whose betrayal had initiated this transformation. Life, like architecture, rarely followed the original blueprints exactly. The true test of success was not adherence to the initial design, but the quality and integrity of the final structure, and the wisdom to adapt when foundations shifted. Beneath your feet. The community feedback meeting for the lakefront project was scheduled in a renovated factory building near the development site. I arrived early to prepare the space and review my presentation notes. This would be our third public meeting, but the first where we'd present detailed renderings of my design concepts incorporating the neighborhood's input. As I arranged chairs facing the projection screen, a deep voice behind me asked, "Are you with Preston Architects?" I turned to find a tall man with warm brown skin and thoughtful eyes watching me from the doorway. His casual but professional appearance suggested he wasn't typical corporate. "Yes, I'm Vanessa Mitchell, lead architect on the lakefront project," I replied, extending my hand. He stepped forward, his handshake firm. "Daniel Reyes, Community Development Director for the city. I was hoping to catch someone from your team before the crowd arrives." "You're in luck," I smiled, recognizing his name from permitting documents. "What can I help with?" He produced a tablet from his messenger bag. "I wanted to discuss the affordable housing allocations. There's been some debate at City Hall about the percentage." "Let me guess," I said, gesturing for him to join me at my table. "The developer is pushing for less, and the neighborhood association is pushing for more." Daniel's lips quirked in a half smile. "You've clearly done this before?" "Actually, this is my first major project since returning to architecture," I admitted, "but some dynamics are universal." For the next 20 minutes, we discussed the balance between financial viability and community needs, finding surprising common ground. Daniel wasn't the bureaucratic obstacle I might have expected. He was passionately informed and genuinely interested in the human impact of our design decisions. "These commercial spaces integrated with the affordable units," he noted, pointing to a section of my rendering. "That's innovative. Most developers keep them completely separate." "The mixed approach creates natural foot traffic for small businesses," I explained, "and it prevents economic segregation. The whole community should feel connected, not divided, into zones of privilege." Daniel studied me with newfound appreciation. "That's exactly the philosophy we've been trying to promote. It's refreshing to find an architect who thinks beyond building aesthetics." "Buildings are for people," I said simply. "If they don't serve the people who will live and work in them, they've failed, no matter how impressive they look in architectural magazines." Our conversation flowed easily until team members and community residents began arriving. Before moving to the officials section, Daniel said, "I'd love to continue this discussion sometime. The city's revising our housing guidelines, and your perspective would be valuable." "I'd be happy to contribute," I replied, keeping my response professionally ambiguous. "Here's my card." As he took it, his fingers briefly brushed mine. "I'll be in touch, Vanessa Mitchell." The meeting proceeded better than I could have hoped. Community members responded enthusiastically to the designs, particularly the features preserving industrial elements while creating modern, sustainable living spaces. When questions turned challenging, I found myself naturally turning to Daniel for support on policy matters. "You two make quite the team," Marina whispered as we transitioned to the next portion. "And he hasn't taken his eyes off you when you're speaking." After the meeting concluded, I was surrounded by residents with follow-up questions. By the time I'd addressed them all, most officials had departed, including Daniel. I felt a surprising twinge of disappointment. As I gathered my materials, Marina approached with a knowing smile. So, the community development director seemed quite impressed, and not just with the architectural renderings. He was professionally interested in the affordable housing components, I clarified. She nodded skeptically. "That must be why he left his personal card with me to give to you, with his cell number written on the back." She held out a business card with a handwritten number and note. "For continuing our conversation about building communities, not just buildings. Daniel." I tucked the card into my jacket pocket. "It's a professional connection." "Of course it is," she agreed too readily. "Just like I professionally notice he's divorced, brilliant, and the most respected member of the City Planning Department. And professionally speaking, you've been separated from Marcus for 4 months now." Later that evening, I found myself turning Daniel's card over in my hands. Our conversation had been stimulating, our professional chemistry undeniable. And, yes, I'd noticed how his eyes crinkled when he smiled and how he listened intently to community concerns. But was I ready to explore whatever spark might exist there? My separation from Marcus remained in limbo, not actively working toward reconciliation, but not formally moving toward divorce either. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "How did the community meeting go?" "Great success," I replied. "The designs were well received. Met the city's community development director, who was surprisingly supportive." Her response came quickly. "Supportive how? And is he cute?" "Asking for a friend. The friend is me." I laughed. Professional support for the affordable housing components. And yes, objectively speaking, he's attractive, intelligent, and left his number. "And? Are you going to call him?" "I don't know," I typed honestly. "Marcus and I are still technically just separated." Rachel's response was characteristically direct. "Being separated means you're free to explore possibilities, Vanessa. That's literally the point of separation, to determine if you want to stay married or move on." Before I could respond, another text arrived. "You're overthinking this. It's just a conversation about affordable housing policy, not a marriage proposal. Call him." The next morning, I made a decision. I'd call Daniel to discuss affordable housing guidelines as his note suggested. If something developed beyond professional collaboration, I'd navigate that when the time came. His phone rang, twice before he answered, his voice warm with recognition when I introduced myself. "Vanessa Mitchell, I was hoping you'd call." "Your note mentioned continuing our conversation about community-focused development," I said. "I'd be happy to offer input on the city's housing guidelines." "It would be helpful," he confirmed. "But I was also hoping to continue our conversation in a less official capacity. Perhaps over dinner?" His directness was refreshing. No games, no ambiguity now. "I should mention that I'm technically separated, not divorced," I said, deciding honesty was the best approach. "It's complicated." "Life usually is," he replied, unfazed. "Dinner doesn't have to be anything more than good food and interesting conversation between two adults who seemed to connect over urban development philosophies." I found myself smiling at his framing. "When you put it that way, it sounds perfectly reasonable." "Friday at 7?" he suggested. "There's a new restaurant in Fulton Market that sources everything locally. Sustainability in cuisine as well as architecture," I noted. Friday works for me. Later that day, I received an email from Marcus about selling our shared vacation property. His tone was respectful, businesslike, with just a hint of the warmth that characterized our recent communications. As I drafted my response, I realized something important. The sharp pain that once accompanied every interaction with him had dulled considerably. In its place was a complex but manageable blend of nostalgia, disappointment, and cautious goodwill. By Friday evening, I'd mentally rehearsed a dozen versions of how dinner with Daniel might unfold. None prepared me for the actual experience. The easy conversation that flowed from professional matters to personal histories, the shared passion for community-centered design, the unexpected moments of laughter. So there I was, he recounted, eyes crinkling with amusement. 11 years old, accidentally locked inside the Metropolitan Museum of Art after closing because I was so absorbed in the architectural models. And that's when you knew you wanted to work in urban planning? He nodded. Some kids dream of being astronauts or firefighters. I dreamed of designing cities where everyone belonged. He studied me across the table. What about you? What drew you to architecture? I believe in the power of spaces to shape experience, to foster connection or isolation, to inspire or discourage, I replied. When I design a building, I'm not just creating structures, I'm creating possibility. At least that's how I see it now. And before? He asked perceptively. Before, I lost sight of that for a while, I admitted. Got caught up in other priorities that weren't really mine. His eyes held mine with genuine interest. And now you found your way back. I'm finding my way forward, I corrected gently. Not back to who I was, but toward who I'm becoming. By the time he walked me to my door, something had shifted in my perception of what might be possible in this new chapter of my life. I enjoyed tonight, he said as we reached my building's entrance. More than I expected to, if I'm being honest. Me too, I admitted, surprising myself with my candor. I'd like to see you again, he continued, but I understand if you need time to sort through your current situation. I'd like that too, I said. The seeing you again part. His smile was warm. Then we'll make it happen. He leaned forward, placing a light kiss on my cheek, respectful but unmistakably interested. Good night, Vanessa Mitchell. Good night, Daniel Reyes. Upstairs in my apartment, I stood at my window, watching the city lights with a newfound sense of possibility. The woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal on their anniversary night had believed her world was ending. She couldn't have imagined standing here 4 months later, professionally fulfilled, personally evolving, open to whatever might come next. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Well, how was dinner with the handsome city official? I smiled, typing back. Surprisingly wonderful, easy, natural, like talking to someone I've known much longer. So there will be a second date? She pressed. I think so, I replied. And Rachel? I think it's time to talk to Marcus about moving from separation to divorce, for both our sakes. Her response was simple but supportive. When you know, you know. I'm here for whatever you need. Setting down my phone, I returned to the window, gazing out at the Chicago skyline that had welcomed me home. Not to the life I'd left behind years ago, but to a new one I was building day by day, choice by choice. My husband had forgotten our anniversary to be with his mistress. I had forgotten to tell him about his layoff. Both acts had stemmed from pain and wounded pride. But what had begun as retribution had transformed into redemption, a catalyst for reclaiming myself, my career, my capacity for joy. Whatever came next, whether exploring possibilities with Daniel or something entirely different, I would face it not as a victim of betrayal, but as the architect of my own life, designing a future built on stronger foundations than before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.